The most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please? Please won't you be my neighbor?
Good morning, neighbors.
Good morning.
How's everyone today?
That's good.
So, in my childhood, I used to always watch Mr. Rogers, and it just had like a big impact on me, because just, I don't know if that was just my childhood or any of yours or that you saw him, but just when you saw him, you knew that he cared. It was just this outpouring of care, just in his personality and everything that he did, you saw that he cared, and that just really touched me as a kid, that to see someone who just, connected with kids and connected with people, and just through the method that he showed that outpouring of care that he had, and it was just, it was inspiring for me, and Mr. Rogers, I don't know if you guys knew, but he was a preacher, and not only was he a preacher, but he used his show to preach to the world in that way and how we should act. And he had a lot of really good points, but there are two things especially that I want to point out to us that we can apply to us as a church, that methods that he had, things that he had, these positive attributes that he had that we can apply to our church. So the first thing that I love about Mr. Rogers is that he opens every single episode with an invite, an invitation. He invites you to be his neighbor. Won't you please, please won't you be my neighbor? It's this invite to be close to you. That's what he always described it as. He said, when I'm asking them to be my neighbor, I'm asking them to be close to me, to draw them in. And that's, as a church, what we need to be doing. We need to be inviting. Inviting is everything. So many pivotal moments in our lives happen when we invite. When we invite, for example, like I invited Sarah to be my wife. That started with an invitation that, is an invitation on one knee, but an invitation, The heirs invited us, to come and to this church. And so we came, and we've been coming, and we love it. Just last week with Tina getting baptized, she invited Christ into her heart. All these things, they start with that invitation. That's just how it opens. That's how Mr. Rogers opened it, and that's how we as a church should be opening it. Now, when we look at Matthew chapter 28 and verse 18, it says, "Then Jesus came to them and said, 'All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age.'" This is Jesus. This is Jesus talking. This is Jesus' final words. When someone gives you their final words, these are things that are important. These are fundamental. The last thing that you're going to tell the people who matter most to you, that's going to be important. You want to impart what you most want them to do, what is most important to you. And to Jesus, before he departed, this is what he told the disciples. He invited them to become inviters. He says, "Therefore go and make. Therefore go and invite. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations." It was an invitation to be an inviter. An invitation to be an inviter. Think about that for a minute. That Jesus' final words were, go, invite, make disciples, baptize them. That's what Jesus wanted us to do. It was important to him. Obviously it was important to him because it was his final words. They were super important. It's so important to invite people to church, to talk about Jesus, to live it out in your life, but to especially invite them here. In inviting, you are saying yes to Jesus' last command, that Jesus gave us that command, that invitation, but we're responding to that in obeying it, in following it out. It's important. It's fundamental. It makes up everything that we are. You know, I don't know about you guys here, but maybe some of you, the whole reason that you're in church in the first place is because someone invited you. You know, they might have had to invite you 20, 30 times, you know. You keep on coming up with creative excuses, say, no, I don't want to go, no, I feel sick, no, you know. But eventually, maybe you were just driven so crazy that you came, and you're still here. An invitation is important. And I want you guys, you know, this is what I hope, and I really, really want, is that you guys will know the thrill of being instrumental in someone coming to church and someone coming to Christ. You know, there's nothing like that. That in your actions and in your invitation, that God worked through you to bring them into the fold. Can you imagine that? I know for some of you it's probably happened, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. But there's that thrill, that feeling that just is indescribable. That someone who was lost, someone who was on their way to hell, was then found, was then saved. It's crazy. It's mind-blowing. It is unlike any feeling in the world. There's nothing else like it. And in obeying that commandment of God, that's how we grow as Christians. We can't grow unless we're inviting, unless we're loving. You know, a lot of people think that the more you know, the more you grow. But knowledge doesn't bring forth growth. You know, not entirely. It brings forth some. You know, knowledge is important, but it's not the more you know, the more you grow. It's the more you love. The more you love. Think about that. That you grow through loving. Other people grow through your love and through loving. It's not about the knowledge. It's not about intelligence. It's not about any of those things, you know? If you look at the people that Jesus had as disciples, they were fishermen. They were tax collectors. You know? It's not like they were the scholars. It's not like they were all these things. No. They didn't have that necessarily that intelligence or that knowledge, but Jesus showed them love. And they in turn showed others love. And God blessed them. They grew. You know? They grew in their faith. And so when we invite, when we are sharing the love of Christ, when we are showing others that love, we also grow. We grow in that. That's how God meant it to be. That it's kind of necessary for us. There's that hole in us that needs to be filled in that. You know? It's filled by God, but we also have to share that. I know it's like if we had the cure for cancer, but we only kept it to ourselves. We have that cure. We have the cure for sin. We've got to share it. We have to invite. It's what the whole book of Acts is about. The whole book of Acts is basically just one big group of people going out and inviting, you know? After Jesus' death, after he was raised again, after he ascended to heaven, the book of Acts happens. And this is directly after the Holy Spirit came upon them. This is in Acts 2, verse 40. It says, and this is Peter talking, just so you know. With many other words, he warned them, and he pleaded with them, "Save yourselves from this corrupt generation." Those who accepted his message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. Already, when they go out, when they start doing that inviting, when they start obeying what Jesus said, there's that outcome. There's that outcome, that outpouring that God blessed on there. Isn't that amazing? Can you picture 3,000 people in one day coming to Christ from one lesson? That's crazy. Can you imagine that thrill that Peter had? Not necessarily in what he did, because it wasn't because of him. It was because of God. But God used him, and through him, God was glorified. It wasn't about him. It's not about me. It's not about Ron. It's not about any of us, It's about God. It's all about God. William Carey, he was a missionary, and his last words were, "Don't tell them about me. Tell them about my Savior." That's what he wanted. That's what we should want. That not that we're great and we're glorified, but that God is glorified through us. That in what we do, the actions that we do, we glorify God. But I'm afraid that some of you may not experience that thrill, that wonder at when someone is giving their story and they mention your name. Here, some of us have just been Christians for so long that we just don't know anyone who's not Christian. We've kind of insulated ourselves from the rest of the world. Everything that we do kind of happens in this Christian subculture of where we're at and who we hang out with and who we eat with and this kind of thing. But that's not what it's all about. Look at Jesus. Jesus ate with the sinners and the tax collectors. Jesus reached out to the poor, the lepers, all these people who no one else, the religious leaders, would have nothing else to do with. So what in doing this, in us only knowing Christians and only hanging out with Christians, we put ourselves in the perfect position to never reach anyone. We can't, because we don't know anyone. We've kind of cut ourselves off. And that's wrong. It's wrong because, God, Jesus himself, when he came down here, he wasn't, just hanging out with everyone who was already good. He said, it's not the healthy that need the doctor, but the sick. He didn't go and have, tons of parties with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and then, discuss the intricacies of doctrine and whatnot. No, he hung out with the poor, the tax collectors, the sinners, the adulterers, the liars, the thieves. Look at Zacchaeus. Look at Mary Magdalene. Those were the type of people that Jesus hung out with. And in hanging out with them, their lives changed. They saw his love. He invited them. He invited them. In Zacchaeus' case, he invited him to do what was right. Zacchaeus, he paid back 7 times the things that he had stolen. And he followed Jesus. Jesus said, "Go and sin no more." Jesus said, "Your sins are forgiven." These things that Jesus said and did were so different from what we do today. And I don't want this to be condemning. I want this to be convicting because I was right and it was convicting for me. It's not how God intended it to be, that we just only see each other. The church body is so important, but it's also important for us to be reaching out. Because if something's just, they say, Jesus said, if a salt loses its flavor, what good is it? But if a salt stays in its shaker, what good is it? What good is it? It's still in there. It's not flavoring the food. It may have tons of flavor. It may be the best flavored salt in the world, but it's still in the shaker. If we're just combined to inside the building, if we're just if we're never reaching out, if we're never coming out of that salt shaker, there's no point. Nothing else gets flavored. Jesus is never shared with the rest of the world. That's why it's so important for us to have these relationships with people outside of our cliques, outside of our Christian norm, because in doing so, we have the opportunity to share Jesus with them, which is more important than anything else. You may think, I don't want to hang out with them. They annoy me. They talk way too much. We don't really have anything in common. How much did Jesus have in common with the tax collectors? But he still ate with them. You don't have to have anything in common with a person to eat with them. Just a desire for food. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure we all have that, So we are, we're designed, we can go and we can outreach and we can do these things in something so simple as sharing a meal with someone. And in getting to know them and showing the love of Christ to them, we can reach them with the gospel. We are put in that position that instead of that we're cut off, we're close. And it's important. It's so important. Here's a little test to see how we're doing on this. When was the last time that you were nervous to come to church because you were going to be meeting a friend or a coworker or a family member or whatever there? And you were nervous, you're kind of like, oh, I hope they like it. What will they think? I hope there's not too many songs. I hope there's not too few songs. I hope that there's a baptism. I hope that everything goes well. I hope Zack's not preaching, You're kind of thinking of all these things, It's going through your mind of, I hope this goes well. I hope this reaches them. When was the last time that you felt that? For some of us, that may be today. For some of us, that may not have been ever. But that's, in reaching out, and even though it's nerve-wracking, even though it's scary, even though it's weird to maybe invite somebody to church or talk about Jesus, it's what's right. It's what God wanted us to do. It was his last words, his command, that's what he wanted us to do. It's important. So when you do that, when you're inviting someone else, when they're looking at church and you're nervous about all these things, you're suddenly looking at church and what we do here Sunday morning through an unchurched person's eyes instead of through your own. And you start to see things that you wouldn't normally notice. Important things. No longer are you thinking about what conveniences you and what, your preferences are. No. When you're thinking about this, you're thinking about how can we reach them? How do they feel? I want to make sure they're comfortable. I want to make sure they're welcome. That's our right way to think on Sunday morning. That's the right way, not to think what music preferences do I have? What preferences of seating do I have? No. How would they be more comfortable here? How can I reach them more? How can I get them to come back? How can I reach them with God's love? Those are the important things. These are the things that we need to be thinking about on Sunday morning. And when you're bringing people, guaranteed you're going to be thinking about those things. You want to introduce them to everyone. You want to make them happy. Make them feel well. Make them feel welcome. It's so important. So you're like, how do I invite people? Because inviting people is scary too. It's like, what do you do? It's like, is this a good time to bring it up? Are they going to be receptive now? There's 3 times in a person's life that are really, things that come up in conversation that are perfect way to draw it back to God and draw it back to church. Not in church. Say like if they're, my church is doing stuff I don't like. We're kind of in between churches right now. Really? You should come to my church. When they're not doing well, family member's sick, I don't know if my dad's going to be around much longer. All these things, really, well, you should come to my church. They're not prepared. We just had a new baby. The kids just left the nest, and we don't know what to do. We're lonely. We miss them. Really, you should come to my church. All these things come up in conversation of these things in people's lives where you say, really, you should come to my church. Invitation, it's important to reach out. Because if you don't reach out, who will? Who will? We all have to do it. It's so important. And it's worth everything. The second thing that I really like about Mr. Rogers, and sorry, we kind of got off a little bit there, but the second thing I love about Mr. Rogers is that he had a love for the neighborhood and he acted on it. He had a love for his neighborhood. Do we have a love for Exeter? How does that love for Exeter influence our actions? Mr. Rogers loved his neighborhood so much that he would, reach out to kids who were in wheelchairs and talk to them and sing with them and do those kinds of things. That he would reach out to people who were looked down upon for race or color or whatever. He reached out to those people who were down and depressed. And he sat with them and helped them. He had a love for his neighborhood and he acted on it. It wasn't just that he loved it, because anybody can love anything, but he acted on it. That's the important part. He had a love and he acted on it. Now let's, in the Bible, there's a couple different verses here about loving your neighbor. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge, and this is in Leviticus. Against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And then in Matthew, one of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question. Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Kind of seen a theme here? It's mentioned so many times. In Romans 13, it says, the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other command there may be are summed up in this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. If you're loving your neighbor as yourself, you're probably not going to kill him. You're probably not going to steal from him. You're probably not going to lie to him. You're not going to commit adultery, because you love your neighbor as yourself. Then also in Galatians 5, it says, for the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the 10 commandments are kind of pushed into this one, because if you're loving God and you're loving your neighbor, you're not going to do those things to God. You're not going to do those things to your neighbor because you love him. You love him. You're not going to replace God as number one in your life because you love him with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind. You're not going to do these sins to your neighbor. You're not going to covet your neighbor's things because you love your neighbor. That's why loving your neighbor is so important. Now, I'm not entirely sure, but just the fact that it was mentioned this many times in the Bible, I think God might be trying to say something. When God repeats himself so many times, he's usually trying to get your attention and say, hey, love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. Loving your neighbor isn't just a feeling. It's an action. It's an action that you don't just you could feel love for your neighbor, say, oh yeah, they're pretty cool. What good is that? You got to act on it. It's that action that matters. It's that showing your love for your neighbor through what you do to them and how you treat them. You know, Jesus gave this whole example over here in Luke 10. If I can get this going. Was working. But in Luke 10, in the story of the Good Samaritan, if you could flip the slide there, he says, and this is the lawyer talking to Jesus, and he says, but he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road. Like, good, a priest. You know, the priest, surely, if he finds this guy, this Samaritan, you know, even though he's a Samaritan and they don't get along, surely this priest is going to stop of anyone going down here. And when he saw the man, passed on the other side. So too a Levite, you know, these guys were experts in the law. These guys were held in pretty high esteem. Surely he would help him. When he came to the place and saw him, passed on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was. A Samaritan, you know, somebody who didn't like Jews. They had this animosity between them. You know, he would probably be the least likely person you would think to stop. But when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and he bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey. Just think about this. He gave up the things that he had there, the oil and the wine and the bandages. You know, he took care of him out of his own expense and put him on his own donkey and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Not only did he already take him and deliver him, you know, most people would think, okay, well, that's good. You know, you did that. You got him out of the road. He's not going to die. Great. This guy went above and beyond. He said, I'm also going to take care of him as long as he needs it. And I will come back and whatever else he needed, put it on my bill. And Jesus asked the lawyer, he says, which of these 3 do you think was the neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. What good is our love if we don't act on it? What good is it? Faith without works is dead, so is love. If you have love for somebody, but you don't act on it, it's meaningless. Really isn't worth anything. We can't continue to talk about love if we're not going to show it. We can't say one thing and do the other. We can't be hearers of the word. We have to be doers also. We have to. That's the problem. That's what Wayne was talking about, that the church is sometimes the enemy of God because we say one thing and we do another. We say one thing and do the other. You know, we talk so much about love, but we got to show it. We got to show it. And what more loving way is there to show love than to invite someone to church, to tell someone about Jesus, because Jesus is the ultimate love. God is love. You can't know that love without God. We have so many excuses to not love our neighbor. You know, all over like the news and everything, you see this person got shot, you know, this person got robbed. And in today's world, we get to see the news from everywhere. You know, if somebody shoots somebody in Washington, D.C., we know about it. If there was a bank robbery in China, we know about it. If someone got kidnapped somewhere in Nebraska, we know about it. And we get all these ideas, of all this horrible stuff, and it kind of paralyzes us. Because we're hearing the news from everywhere of what happened over here and what happened over here, that we then take that, we apply that in our community of excuses of why not to help. You see somebody really struggling to pick up a box, you think, no, I can't go help them, they might shoot me. Because some guy got shot in Omaha last week. You see someone trying to load something in the car, no, I can't help them. Because I might get kidnapped. We've kind of made all these, already this checklist that automatically our mind goes to know why I can't help, why I can't show love to my neighbor. When really, we need to be focusing on what can we do. That doesn't mean just like willy-nilly run off. The Bible says still be wise as serpents. But still show love. We can't give all these excuses of why not. Why not? When Jesus gave us every reason why to do it. Jesus went to go eat with the sinners and the tax collectors. Probably the people most likely to commit murder, you would think, Probably the most likely people to pick your pockets or whatever. The kind of people that he hung out with weren't really the reputable people. That's what God calls us to do, though. He doesn't call us to give an excuse why not, why we can't help that person. He just says help that person. He says do good to your neighbor. Love your neighbor. Show that love. We got to show it. That's why it's so important to invite. But not only to invite, because if you just give an invitation, what good is that if you're not showing love? I know if I needed help. Say I was an unchurched person, I needed help with something. You kind of passed on, like the Pharisee, like the Levite. You passed on the side. If you later come and try to invite me to church, I'm like, what? Really? In my time of need, you didn't help. Why would I do that for you? We got to live it. We got to show it. Because if we're not showing it, when we invite, it's going to be meaningless. It really will be. We have to show that love in our actions towards our neighbors, and then that love in inviting them. And that's what I want to leave you guys with today, is what is the worst thing that could happen from inviting or loving your neighbor? I don't know. May not be much. Or I could get shot. But I'd rather stand before God saying, yeah, I got shot trying to share the gospel with this guy, than, anything else. But here's the thing. What's the worst thing that can happen to that person if you don't? Again, I don't know. But they're on a path to hell right now. And it's up to us as a church, us as individuals, to do everything that we can to get them off of that. We're going to sing a final song here and have a closing prayer. If you need to respond, please do so.